All right, so a program like this, how early and what age do you suggest a pitcher gets involved?
Well, number one, as soon as you start to pitch competitively on a regular basis, that's when you should be involved. And Dr. Andrews has said this quote many, many times. The seeds of injury were planted during the early years of baseball. Many of the injuries that happen in the adolescent, teenage years happen right from the time that they start pitching in Little League. So it's very critical that once you start to pitch, because of the risk of injury, it's critical that you make sure that your delivery is solid right from the very beginning. Because if you have major flaws in your delivery, you are planting the seeds of injury early on in your career.
All right, with all these injuries, and it's well known that we're at epidemic proportions here, the stats are very compelling. Where, in your mind, and from your talking to the people at the American Sports Medicine Institute, where are we going wrong here?
Well, number one, let's take a look at the Major League level first, Jim. In the last decade, the last 10 years in Major League Baseball, pitching injury salaries have been spent. Over $1.4 billion have been spent on injured pitchers in the last 10 years. In 2008 alone, pitching salaries were $1.2 billion. Pitching injuries, they've spent over $330 million on pitchers under DL in 2008. At the amateur level, in the last 10 years, Tommy John surgeries have increased over 700%. And in each year, 45% of pitchers under the age of 12 experience chronic elbow pain. 6 out of every 10 high school players complain of elbow pain. It's very critical that you have proper mechanics. And proper mechanics simply just are not taught because people really just don't understand what's actually happening in the pitching delivery. Also, pitchers are not conditioning properly. It's not just about lifting weights or doing exercises. It's about having a conditioning program that's comprehensive, that addresses how to train the body so that you can pitch more effectively and maximize your performance. And it's critical that you have the insight, and the only way that you can have the insight for the potential of injury is by having an analysis of your delivery.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question then, the main causes. What are the main causes or reasons for all these injuries?
Very simple, Jim. It's very simple. Overuse, overuse, overuse. Pitchers are being abused. Pitch counts are way too high from Little League on up. It's overuse not only in the game, but overuse long-term over the course of a season. Number two, pitchers get hurt because they're poorly conditioned. They have not done the right conditioning program so that they can withstand the forces of pitching. And lastly, there's flaws in the pitching delivery. There's poor mechanics. They have measurements in their pitching delivery that are out of the normative ranges. And there's certain measurements that if you're out of the normative range, you are in major, major risk of injury. Dr. Andrews' research is compelling to say that you're going down that path of injury if these are not cleaned up and correct.
Rick, I think you cut out on us a little bit in terms of Dr. Andrews' research. You said it's very compelling. Rick, pick up, if you would, right there.
Dr. Andrews' research is compelling that if you have some major flaws in your delivery, your risk of injury is major. So it's very critical that you clean up those flaws and correct those flaws before you get injured.
Okay. All right. That was good. All right. So let's get back to our 3P program here. There's 4 elements to that. Talk more about that, if you would.
The center core of the 3P sports program is getting a biomechanical analysis. Just like in spring training right now, it's the first time in the history of Major League Baseball that our owner, Mark Antonesio, has dedicated. We had a lab where we did analysis of every one of our Major League pitchers in spring training. We're going to do it organizational-wide at the minor league level. So making sure that you have the measurements in your pitching delivery so that we can correct those flaws. Then you have your skills and drills. The drills that we're doing right now in spring training with our pitchers are the same drills that little leaguers all the way through college pitchers now involved with our program. They're doing the exact same drills. Every drill that we utilize, Jim, has been tested in Dr. Andrews' lab to make sure that this actually does train the pitching delivery to keep the delivery in the normative ranges. Having a physical conditioning program. So when you look at for example, in the pitching delivery, hip rotation velocities, how fast the hips start to rotate and then the upper torso starts to rotate, that is directly linked to fastball velocity. Our conditioning program is very specific based on the measurements of the pitching delivery. Very similar when you saw the Olympics, the Summer Olympics, and you looked at Michael Phelps, and they did biomechanical analysis of his swimming. And they designed a program and a stroke specifically so that he can get through the water faster. Very, very similar. And then you have your performance-based behavior coaching. How do you think, act as a major league pitcher? Wouldn't it be great if you took, say, for example, CC Sabathia in the course of a game in the World Series last year, and you could listen to his thoughts, how he is thinking in the course of a game, and Harvey Dorfman being an expert, you know, he gives tips on how to think properly in competition and to make these kind of adjustments.
All right, so let's focus on the biomechanical analysis. That is obviously critical. Like you said, you had all of your pitchers out, and with the Brewers and Major League camp go through that this spring. And when you have flaws in the delivery, it's hard to tell. It's not obvious. But this is something you have been using basically your whole professional career as a coach. We've got a number of examples here, but walk us through some of the measurements. What do they mean? How do you use them? Why do you use them?
Well, let's talk about first. When the foot hits the ground, Jim, that is the moment of truth. When the foot hits the ground, everything needs to be in line at the proper time. So let's take stride length. If it's too short or too long, it affects hip rotation velocities. The elbow angle at foot contact. You know, if it's too closed or too open, you know, you start to put a lot of pressure on the elbow and the shoulder. Maximum external. If you have limited maximum external rotation, it's going to lock the hips. It'll either that or it'll open up the hips too soon, and that affects major factor on the shoulder and the elbow. And let's say lead foot placement, the angle of your foot and the direction of your foot towards your target. And if it's in proper position, it puts forces on the arm and the elbow and the shoulder as it goes up the chain. So these are just a couple examples or a handful of examples. But when the foot strikes the ground, that is the moment of truth, that we need to be in proper position at that particular time to maximize rotational forces. And in the 3P program, all the drills and coaching that we do is for the delivery is all to make sure that we are in proper position when the foot strikes the ground.
Okay, so we have a couple of examples here. Let's take the maximum external rotation. And if you look here on the screen, the be in within range, what we call it within range, 174 to 190 degrees. In this particular example, the maximum external rotation of this pitcher is 174.8, so he's within the range, just barely. Talk about what that means.
He's right on the edge, Jim, and what we've done for this particular pitcher, we've helped him gain more flexibility in the rotator cuff so that he can have more maximum external rotation to get to around 180, so he can extend that. But he's right at the danger line right now, and it was really, you know, it was really insightful for him to go through the 3P program so that we could correct some of these flaws, and we've corrected these flaws for this particular high school pitcher who should be in the top 100 pitchers drafted in the 2010 amateur draft.
Okay, so and in the next picture we have here, arm position at foot contact. Within range is 82 to 104 degrees. This pitcher's example, 68.9, so obviously he is not within range. Explain to everybody what that means.
This means you're late. This means when your foot strikes the ground, your arm is late. And if you're late, every single pitch that you make when you're late, you're banging the shoulder. If you're on time when the foot strikes the ground, and they measure, when we look at the measurements, what happens with the activity of the shoulder does no work whatsoever through the acceleration phase. This particular pitcher, once again, we've been able, through the drills, through 3P Sports, we've been able to get him timed up more properly so that now when his foot strikes the ground, he's on time, and he's taking a lot of pressure off his elbow and shoulder.